My name's Bismarck, and I am here through the portal to share my life review that I've walked in death. It's quite interesting, in death, when the interdimensions is the very representation of death. So literally and figuratively, walking in death. And the point that I walked throughout my life experience was, before I give it away from the very beginning, let me give you a perspective of the basic experience of my life in this world from a very young age, and how I walked this throughout my entire life, never finding a solution or a way out or a method of changing what I slowly but surely throughout my life became aware of, and eventually died in sadness, where it felt like I cried for the first time in my total life, where I cried for me. And that was quite a significant point. Yes, realized very, very, very late, where my experience towards my end in this world, in this reality, was met with sorrow, but within that, an actual sadness for myself, where I cried for me. And what I realized I had done, and the primary point within that I had to face in death, walking my life review, was regret, and actually walking through forgiving myself for giving up on me. And what I struggled with the most within that self-forgiveness process was that, had I, and do I, deserve forgiving myself for giving up on myself? But then the very interesting point emerged, where again, by not gifting myself with that opportunity to forgive myself, I'm giving up on myself. And when I'd seen, realized, understood that point, I walked through the self-forgiveness, and I stood up, and now I'm here. So let me share my story of my life and why it ended with sorrow, a crying for me. Throughout my life, from when I was very young, I had a interesting ability to observe other people, and within the observation of people, see what it is that they like or dislike, prefer, don't prefer, enjoy, don't enjoy, find interesting, find unnerving, what entices them, what disgusts them, what intrigues them, and what repels them. And I found this ability quite interesting when I was younger, because it was very natural for me to be able to assess and profile human beings. And I even played around with this when I was younger, obviously first with my parents, in observing how they would interact with my elder siblings. And I could even assess and remember and recall the very detail of how my brothers and sisters would use their tonalities, their eyes, their body movements, mannerisms, and manipulate a situation which I knew that they did or had done, but could talk themselves out of it with my parents simply by playing with eye movements, voice tonality, and behavior, mannerisms, eye movements. And it's quite interesting because when I initially observed this relationship between my older brothers and sisters and my parents, it was like a natural thing that was in all children, in having the ability to utilize particular physical mechanisms to manipulate a situation or a point or another human being. However, when I approached or asked them how is it that they learned how to do that, they were completely flabbergasted in terms of not understanding or knowing what it is I'm talking about. But to me, it looked like they knew exactly what they were doing. And so I slowly but surely start realizing, okay, I'm the only one within my immediate environment that can see, interpret, and understand the detail of how this interplay is working. And so I tested it out for myself in where I would get myself into trouble, and what had been the most certain point within that getting into trouble was that my parents didn't have any hard physical evidence of it ever being me or any of my siblings. So I would simply utilize my eyes, my mouth, my voice, my physical in presenting myself as though I really did not do it. And I would become that point completely and accordingly communicate and speak with my parents in that way. So, because I had to look at how exactly my siblings did it, and they utilized the very big eyes, serious mouth, slow breathing, standing still, and responding with a slow, even voice. And so I very often got myself out of trouble through simply becoming a point and really standing as though it was real. Like, even though I did something, I could put myself physically, mentally in a position of I didn't, and so got away with a lot of things. I mean, it never got out of hand. I had my head screwed on quite well as a young boy, but I enjoyed playing with that ability to become something and manipulate another human being or a situation. I, for example, also in terms of making friends, then as I was growing older, I was very shy, insecure, and afraid. And so I utilized this ability of becoming a point so completely, and would hide or suppress those experiences that would come up through becoming what I see people with friends do. So I would literally make as though within myself I have a lot of friends, and would literally visualize it within myself, who I am with lots of friends, and I'd actually sit and lay in my bed in the evenings and prepare myself for physically participating within particular points in my world and reality, such as making friends. And this was especially with starting school, and I more preferred being alone with myself, but again, after being having older siblings, the whole experience of being a loner or an outsider, I have seen the consequences thereof in terms of the bullies and the negative physical and mental impact, and therefore I made a decision that I will not have this happen to me. So the only way of it not happening to me is for me to change myself. So I would observe what people with friends do, how they are, and I would become it. I would envision myself having lots of friends, and I'd physically experience myself change, where I'd put my shoulders back, lift my chest, smile, be boastful, expressive, friendly, open. But it's not that that was who I was, really. I was shy, insecure, and fearful, and it was just easy for me to fit myself into such suits for a moment, to be able to fit into and walk this world and this reality. And as I grew older, I did it more and more and more. Teachers, family, and what I found, especially in the community where I was growing up in, with being very religious in nature, is that everyone responds very well to friendly, good-natured, in their place, good-mannered human beings, and accordingly that's what I did and became. And with, for example, teachers, parents, friends, it's very easy to please in doing very simple things such as homework, reading, completing tasks, answering questions, participating in sports and games and parties and things like that. So my whole life had been lived within that context, where I would envision and become, and in the evenings would play within myself and my world and reality, and accordingly see how and who I must be for me to relate to human being or human beings or an environment or a sport or a project or things like that. So it was never a natural point of me just being me. I was petrified of being myself, particularly within the point of I was seeing that I was completely different from everyone and everything else, and I did not know how anyone would respond to me being myself. I mean, for example, I would have preferred reading, I would have preferred having conversations about the world, about how things came about. I was always very curious about where we came from. I mean, religions from when I was growing up was more just like a story to me. It wasn't real. It was like there is always something more. Where did the human physical body come from? Where did the insects, the bugs, the grass, I mean, how could something have just conceived this? You know, I was really like, even as a young child, that there is something more to everything, and I would have really liked to have these types of conversations with people, but again, nowhere within no one in my world, in my environment, that exists in any way whatsoever. So I kept it to myself completely. I mean, I didn't even write it or speak it or convey it in any way whatsoever. It was just an internal point that I would explore within myself. And eventually got from school to expanding my education and becoming older and living my life. And obviously it was quite a game to interact with females throughout my life. But I found that to be the most easy, really, in terms of assessing women, because I would do an interesting thing in terms of when meeting women is to meet their parents, and especially their father, as I had throughout my life experience in observing women and their tendency towards males was an immediate direct relationship representation with their father. So if I'd gotten to know their father, I would get a perspective or an idea of how I am to be to impress or to please in forming or shaping a relationship with them. That was the primary nature of relationships that I found, was that everyone wants others to be who they want them to be. And if each other gives that to each other, then relationships work. So from that perspective, it's very easy to form relationships. And eventually, my whole fear of other human beings evaporated through me simply being what they wanted me to be. And so I moved very easily throughout my life experience, because human beings are quite very simple things. You simply find out one or two or few things of the person, what it is that they like, and simply mold, shape, form, and direct yourself to those likings. And accordingly, you have a connection, and from the connection, you can develop a long-term relationship. And so whenever I'd meet a woman, I would, as fast as possible, meet the father, because women were quite interesting in that they would put up a front of themselves in what it is that they like or prefer or enjoy, but I obviously knew that that was a portrayal in terms of trying to find a male in that same and that very same point of wanting to please, to establish a connection. And so I had to see through that to be able to do that to the woman, what she's trying to do to me. And that would be through meeting the father. And back in those days, it was quite a cordial point of obligation in terms of when anything, or as anything becomes serious in any way, the family is first introduced, and therefore it was quite a very easy point to do. And I would assess the father, the handshake, the firmness, the smile, the eyes, the behavior, and things like that, simply accordingly mold myself within that. And voila, we had quite a successful relationship. However, what had become more prominent within my relationship with females was that I couldn't sustain it for very long. because I had never had another human being within constant, continuous, close proximity with me. And I mean, it was very easy for me to become someone for a moment with another person or environment or place or experience, because it's very easy to just be it for that moment, shut it off, turn around, go to the next point. But it always had to be a constant movement in terms of where I had to alter and change myself for another person, environment, or group. And here I have been now with females, and they're in constant, continuous, close proximity with me. And eventually I realized that this cannot work, because I cannot be constant with them. Meaning, even though it's very easy to establish a connection in terms of long-term meaning for a while, not long-term in terms of lifetime, in playing with those few points of likings and then suppressing and maintaining my actual self-reactions and experiences, I can do that for a while consciously. However, slowly but surely, these experiences within myself became more and more and more intense, and became more difficult to suppress or keep away, where usually with human beings I'd have to like certain things which I myself did not necessarily like. And then this irritation and frustration and anger would come up inside myself, and I'd really have to physically hold myself in place for it to not come up. And I would see human beings as very limited within their scope of themselves and their life, because I mean, all I was interested in was existence and where we came from and what was here. But human beings focused on such trivial things. But I had to force myself to do this, because relationships were and was how I established myself within my family, my friends, my education, my job, I mean everything. And eventually it became more and more difficult for me to obviously sustain a relationship with a female. And so I became a man that went from female to female to female, and the moment it got to a point where I could see that I was becoming irritated or frustrated or angry, I'd simply break it off, because myself was starting to come out and I could not sustain this experience anymore. And I went through quite a few women within my life experience. And it's interesting that not once throughout that did I consider just being myself. And consider meaning actually do it. It did come up when I started meeting and being with females. And I mean, there was a few that was part of my life where I really wanted them to be part of me for the rest of my life. But what came up within me was, I don't know who I am. I don't know how to be me. I don't know how not to be this person that can change, mold, and shape themselves to being liked by others. This is what I've been doing throughout my life. The only point that I know about myself is that I'm interested in where we come from within existence. And not even that I actually investigated or went into, because most of my time was simply preoccupied with aligning myself to be liked and accordingly establish connections with other human beings and my environment and this world and this reality. That was my lifeline. And as I got older, obviously one gets older and one's human physical body no more produces the functions that it did when it was young and vibrant and full of life and energy. And as this started happening, the more and more and more I became isolated from other human beings. I didn't have any family of my own because I couldn't sustain a relationship. And I deliberately removed myself from friends, from groups, from environments, because I knew that I physically and mentally could not sustain the energy required within myself to build myself up into being a certain type of person. I mean, it's really hard work, smiling all the time, behaving a certain way, and speaking and voice tonality and holding yourself a certain way. It takes a lot of effort and work within yourself. So eventually, when I just couldn't handle it anymore, I slowly but surely started removing myself from my world and reality. And which eventually got me to a very old age where I was at an old age home, and I lived there for 10 years alone. And throughout that time, all I did within myself, with others, my world and reality, was just observe. I was just quiet, and I still looked at how people interact, speak, behave, the voices, the eyes, the smiles, the hand movements and gestures, the walking, the dressing, the smells. And it became more and more clear to me the extent to which we are all quite the same in how we use our physical body mechanics in interacting with each other. But the more and more I looked at these interactions throughout the years, the more and more I saw how it is that all of us really live within this front within ourselves, where it's like we're pushing ourselves out from our human physical bodies into this total portrayal of ourselves and completely hiding what is really going on in the depths of ourselves. And throughout the years, I became more and more angry and frustrated, and just there was a complete giving up of just living, because it was like, what is the reason or purpose or point of being in this world, in this reality, when this is all that we're doing really within ourselves and with each other, is creating these personas of portrayals just to be liked, to connect, to have friendships and relationships, to be something or someone in this world, in this reality. And then I talked myself into a total anger possession within myself, and I later in life became really angry just at myself, at everything and everyone, and just became so fake. Yet in the days before I died, I actually had a look at myself, and walking through my life here on earth, and I essentially did an earth life review, if you will. And I realized that, I mean, I knew that I was angry at myself. Primarily the sadness in how I interpreted then was that I really wanted some of these women to be a part of my life long term, and that is initially where my anger seeded, because I also knew I couldn't, because I really did not know who I was, how I would be if I were to be me, what I liked, what I enjoyed, how to behave just by being me. And just the very thought of that petrified me, and so I simply just suppressed it, ignored it, and hid it within myself, and justified why it is that I went woman after woman after woman. And when I realized and saw this point that throughout my entire life I had not once been me, I had not once really lived myself, made a decision for myself, acted and behaved and investigated and explored me, my world within myself and without, and found out who I was within me and my world. When I saw that and came face to face with that point of responsibility, was where I experienced the depths of sadness, which was simply beyond me, and I just cried. I mean, I'd never really cried throughout my life. I mean, males just do not cry. And I allowed myself to just cry and cry and cry. And in terms of physically, I just made the decision to really die, to just go, to leave this world, because the depths of that realization that I did not know who I was, I did not live me, and I had the opportunity to stop and discover who I was, I simply didn't. It was easier to find out how to be like, to become it for a moment and do it. And within my life review in the interdimensions, I had to forgive myself for accepting and allowing myself to not trust me, to allow myself to get to know me. And within that, not accepting and allowing myself to think or believe or perceive that I need other human beings' likings of me to be able to fit in, live, and survive in this world, in this reality. That I did not trust that with me being myself, in really getting to know myself and living myself, that I will accordingly establish relationships with other human beings who respect me equal to one with how I respect myself. But instead, I formed relationships of absolute nothingness, really, because none of those relationships remained with me throughout my life in any way whatsoever. They were worth nothing, because I did not make myself worthwhile within me and within my life or towards my relationships. So, if there's a thing to take with you within what I've walked within my life experience on this earth, is to investigate for yourself the extent to which you have changed yourself for others just to be liked, just to have a connection or a relationship, and realize what one is in fact doing within that is giving up on oneself. One is in fact deliberately suppressing a part of oneself that one is thinking, believing, or perceiving, that if one were to allow oneself to be that others will negate you or ostracize you or fight you. And instead of facing those parts within ourselves, we then hide, suppress, or deny it, and instead put up this fake personality and exhaust ourselves throughout our days within ourselves and our relationships to try and maintain and sustain our total fakeness. And within and through that, as time, we start losing ourselves. And for those human beings that do this consciously within awareness, stop. And know that with you being yourself, in terms of doing what it is that you enjoy doing, dressing like it is you enjoy dressing, participating in things that you enjoy participating in, like, for example, writing, reading, communicating, interacting. But then, for example, your friends or your social network is into just partying or hanging out and not taking any responsibility for any schoolwork, homework, projects or things like that, but that's actually what you in fact really enjoy doing. I suggest being self-honest with you and establishing and standing within you and yourself, and realize that with you being you, with you getting to know yourself and investigating who you are, that you will establish and have relationships within your world and your reality that is in fact worthwhile, that will expand you within you and your world, and not diminish you in just ending up like a very angry old man dying of sorrow. Thank you very much. An actual sadness for myself, where I cried for me, and what I realized I had done, and the primary point within that I had to face in death, walking my life review, was regret, and actually walking through forgiving myself for giving up on me. And what I struggled with the most within that self-forgiveness process was that had I, and do I, deserve forgiving myself for giving up on myself? But then the very interesting point emerged where, again, by not gifting myself with that opportunity to forgive myself, I'm giving up on myself. And when I'd seen, realized, understood that point, I walked through the self-forgiveness and I stood up. And because it was very natural for me to be able to assess and profile human beings. And I even played around with this when I was younger, obviously first with my parents, and observing how they would interact with my elder siblings. And I could even assess and remember and recall the very detail of how my brothers and sisters would use their tonalities, their eyes, their body movements, mannerisms, and manipulate a situation which I knew that they did or had done, but could talk themselves out of it with my parents simply by playing with eye movements, voice tonality, and behavior, mannerisms, eye movements. And it's quite interesting because when I initially observed this relationship between my older brothers and sisters and my parents, it was like a natural thing that was in all children, in having the ability to use. Now I'm here. So let me share my story of my life and why it ended with sorrow, a crying for me. Throughout my life, from when I was very young, I had a interesting ability to observe other people, and within the observation of people, see what it is that they like or dislike, prefer, don't prefer, enjoy, don't enjoy, find interesting, find unnerving, what entices them, what disgusts them, what intrigues them, and what repels them. And I found this ability quite interesting when I was younger. The basic experience of my life in this world from a very young age, and how I walked this throughout my entire life, never finding a solution or a way out or a method of changing what I slowly but surely throughout my life became aware of, and eventually died in sadness, where it felt like I cried for the first time in my total life, where I cried for me. And that was quite a significant point. Yes, realized very, very, very late, where my experience towards my end in this world, in this reality, was met with sorrow, but within that, hi, my name's Bismarck, and I am here through the portal to share my life review that I've walked in death. It's quite interesting, in death, when the interdimensions is the very representation of death. So literally and figuratively, walking in death. And the point that I walked throughout my life experience was, before I give it away from the very beginning, let me give you a perspective of